This is a Breakout Director Award, and it is the second year that we've done it. It was essentially created over coffee with Jason Weinberg, who thought it would be a great idea, and it has turned out to be a wonderful idea. And it is given to a film that is a breakout film, a film that gets attention, that rises to the top. It doesn't have to be a first-time director or even a third-time director, but it has to be relatively new. And Three Identical Strangers has been that. I mean, it has been talked about in the press, the industry press, tremendously. Now, we have a jury that selects this film, and Jason Weinberg and Carter Burton are here to represent that jury. They're on that jury. They did a really good job. They had a hard time, but I'm going to let you tell them about it, and I'm going to let them come up. Watch the step. Come here. Come on. This is Carter Burton, Jason Weinberg.
I'll speak on behalf of the jury. We saw a lot of documentaries, a lot of incredible and great documentaries, but this film stood out among all the rest for being a truly incredible story, well told, and a memorable film, which also took place largely in our immediate area in Long Island. So I just want to congratulate our honoree, and should we... Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Do you want to say some words? Just really quickly.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. First of all, thank you guys so much for this award. It means a hell of a lot to me. It's my first feature. All I've ever wanted to do is make movies, and this is the first one. It's taken me a while to get here. I want to thank you all for coming out today on a rainy Sunday to see this movie. I hope you enjoy it. Just very quickly should thank a few people. You know, this story, it's well known now because of the movie, and bits of it were well known before, but really only about a third of what ended up being in the film was really well known before. So I had an incredible team who pieced the story together over many years. It took us a long time to do. It encompasses 6 decades, so it took a long time to kind of work out which were the relevant bits and to dig out the right people and the right bits of information to make sense of it all. It took 6 years to make. I had 2 children, got engaged, married, and had 2 children in the time it took me to make this film. I'll be back at the end. Thank you for your patience waiting outside. I'm sorry it took us a while to get going. And I'll be back at the end to answer any questions you might have. Thank you so much. Cheers.
Absolutely mind-boggling piece of work. From the very beginning, such an in-depth look at something that is so incredibly complex and with so many different sides and pieces that you pull together, and through it all, just completely focused on the human side of the story, just the humanity of it. And the things that went wrong. Just for background, you said you always wanted to make a film. You want to make films. Did you always want to make documentary films? This is your first film. It's a documentary.
Yeah, I always wanted to make films. From being a teenager, I just fell in love with cinema, and I kind of drama was my first love, and I kind of fell into documentary. And I have made some documentaries for television in the UK, but this was very much the first feature, like cinema film. And I think the truth is I was waiting for about 18 years to find a story that I felt justified being told on a big screen. You know, quite often I go and see documentaries at festivals, and after about 60 minutes, they start to run out of steam a bit. And this at one point, there was a lot of pressure on us to make this into a series. And there is enough material for a series. But I like going to see films where there's almost too much information in there, and you feel at the end you want to go and learn more about it, and you want to, it just as a surplus of narrative and a surplus of ideas. I like those kind of films, and that's always how I saw this one.
Well, and miraculous with the amount of material that you had, and as complicated as it was, that you boiled it down to this much that we could make it comprehensible. Just from a filmmaking perspective, what point did you seize on the story? Where was the story when you seized on it? And you spent 6 years making it, I get that, but where was the story at when you jumped in?
So someone, a producer, brought the idea into the company I worked for. At the time, I was like the ideas guy at the company, and it's a company called Raw. They made a documentary called The Imposter a few years back, and recently American Animals, which is a drama that's been in theatres this year. And when you do that job, you just become very jaded and cynical, and you kind of feel like you see every idea under the sun, because every week you're seeing 100 ideas. And but one day this came in, and instantly I could see it was probably the best documentary idea anyone had ever pitched me. And because it works on a human level, like you say, it's got this very human story of these brothers separated and then reunited, but it also enables you to ask these much bigger, almost philosophical questions about nature versus nurture, free will, destiny, and the nature of family, I guess. And so it works on those layers, which not all documentaries particularly have. And so from then on, I was like, I have to make this film. In terms of how far along it was, the person who brought it in, she probably knew about 40% of the story. And by the time we got to production, we probably knew about 60%. But then everything else has come out since then through making the film, and a lot's happened since the film's come out as well. And so it makes me laugh a bit when I see, it's got its Wikipedia page now, and, people say to me, oh, it was a great story, well done for finding it. But we literally had to piece it together, and my producer, Becky Reed, and the editor played a huge part in that.
When it was pitched to you, they'd already discovered that Lawrence Wright had done the story, and it was revealed that there had been a study that was already in place.
That was already known about, but not much detail, And Lawrence was very honest with us that he always felt this was the one that got away from him, And he's one of the great living American journalists, I would say, and he had always been frustrated that he'd never got to the bottom of it. And I wouldn't necessarily say we have, but we've definitely moved it on quite a bit. And when we sent him the film to watch, Lawrence Wright, and he just wrote back, he writes very short emails, and he said, there's some good journalism in this, well done. And that was it. We were like, wow, great, thank you.
That's excellent. And you did have an effect. The film has had an effect, because near the end, you said, as a result of this film, that the study had been revealed to Robert. And
so what's happened is, basically through the efforts of my producer, Becky Reed, who spent a year pretty much dealing with the Jewish Board of Family and Children's Services, and it's worth saying they would only communicate with us via a crisis management PR firm, and only with the brothers via a medical malpractice attorney. But after a year of kind of working with the brothers to get access to this material, and they had to jump through so many hoops, we got 11,000 pages of documents relating to the two brothers, very heavily redacted, almost like military documents, black lines through them. And we also got the films, which no one's seen in 60 years, those films that you saw at the end, the little black and white ones. And it was literally, they were delivered to us on the last day of the edit, so we didn't have long to kind of put them in. The other thing that's happened since the film is that, as it completed, is, I got a call from a lady from New Jersey who said, I've just watched your movie. I was adopted from the same agency, and I've just taken a DNA test as a result of seeing the film, and it's matched me with someone in Calabasas in California. And I've looked her up on Facebook, and we look identical. And I filmed the meeting for the first time a few months ago in New York, and they're 54-year-old twin sisters who'd never met before. So it's kind of extraordinary, and we don't know how many more are out there.
Which is more phenomenal still. When they got released, the records that they got, the 11,000 pages, heavily redacted to protect other people, but nobody's ever gotten to the bottom of the design of the experiment and what they were looking for and the results of it. None of that's come out.
No, I mean, there's a lot of interesting information in these documents. Essentially, what they are is all the observations that they made about them, but then also some minutes of meetings where the scientists are all sitting around discussing what some of the findings might be. And what's interesting, it's a mix of like hard scientific data, like birth weight and IQ and things like that, and sort of height, weight, all that kind of stuff. And then more kind of psychoanalytic stuff, that they were psychoanalysts, and they were trying to measure things like I don't know, phallic stages of development and object relations theory and things like this, which don't really lend themselves very well to kind of scientific analysis. So there is a big question mark in my head about, how valid a lot of this data is. And certainly Lawrence Perlman, the scientist who's sort of laughing inappropriately in the latter half of the film, he left. One of the reasons he left is because he felt that he's a research psychologist, and he felt all these psychoanalysts he was working with they were collecting all this data but weren't processing it properly and weren't thinking about the things you'd think about as a research psychologist. But there are some fascinating details there. A lot of it's very tragic details. Like, for example, we discovered that Eddie had been adopted by another family before the Gallen family, and it was a failed adoption, so he was kind of given back, and you wonder what effect that would have had on him. There's also, I find really shocking, the scientists, they're sitting around discussing they're saying, all these children seem to have really, anxiety issues and behavioural problems. I wonder why that is. And they're sort of saying, maybe it's because forceps were used in a lot of the deliveries and stuff. At no point do they say, well, maybe it was us. And the other really shocking thing is that so all the families around 1970, independently, said to them, when the boys were about 10, 11, said, look, we don't want you to carry on with this coming and doing experiments on our kids. They're just getting fed up. We don't want any more. And what's clear is that despite the wishes of the parents, they continued to observe these families. So, for example, David in the film talks about spending time in a psychiatric institution when he was like 15, 16, and they have the records from that hospital in the study, and they're following them. They're discussing the brothers even after the reunion, even up until I think till as late as 1988. They're still kind of talking about them, and I think Neubauer's saying, David Kellman would make a study in his own right. He's such a fascinating person. So I think that's been really shocking for the brothers to discover that even when their parents, formally said we don't want any more part of this, not even knowing the full extent of it, they were still followed.
It's another incredible aspect. Throughout the film, and very much the older lady, I can't remember what her relationship was.
Which one? The family member?
Yes.
So Aunt Hetty is in the family. She is, without doubt, the most extraordinary human being that I have ever encountered in any walk of life. She's a late 80s, Holocaust survivor, just one of the wisest people I've ever met. The family, David's family, they call her the Yiddish Yoda because she's so wise. She kind of sees through. And what I love about this film is that you kind of have opposite ends of the spectrum, the sort of moral spectrum, I guess. You have her on one hand, and then you have Natasha, and they kind of represent opposite or very different kind of moral standpoints on what was done. And I think, it's really nice that you have these women in their 80s that kind of are such big characters and such an important part of the film.
And her observation at the end, which is that one of the takeaways, is that there's nothing you can do about your genetics, but you can do things through child rearing or through experimentation or through other ways that are going to have profound effects on the way a child or a human develops. So that's obvious.
Yeah.
But the fact that she's a Holocaust survivor, and the fact that Neubauer was a Holocaust survivor, and the incredible incomprehensibility of someone who knows what happened during the Holocaust and is then going to perform experiments on twins is beyond the pale to me.
I think you're right, and I think the central irony here is that Neubauer and David's family both were from Austria originally, and they both fled the Holocaust. They end up in America on either sides of this experiment, and look, I'm not Jewish, but my wife is, and she finds watching the film incredibly tough because of that, because the idea that Jewish people would be involved in experimentation on other Jewish people so close to the end of World War II, so close to what we know about what Mengele was doing at Auschwitz, she sort of finds it beyond comprehension, and I guess for me, I've always seen it as a universal story about family and the issues that I sort of talked about, but I have to respect that for Jewish audiences, it's got an added layer of meaning, and it's very powerful, and that's why I included the lines from Hedy talking about, coming from the Holocaust, and Bobby's line about this being like Nazi shit.
Yeah, but the difference between receiving the wisdom that she has and his interest in doing this experiment, as I say, incomprehensible. A question I have, the research assistant that you saw in La Jolla, so very kind of detached and a scientific researcher, but she left the experiment early on. What is her relationship to all these celebrities, and what's her status at this point?
So she is, again, Natasha, one of the more extraordinary people I've ever met, and certainly an interview with her, I mean, she's late 80s, I believe, as well, and just sharp as a button, and really, I found that her detachment from it all quite shocking, but also quite fascinating. I mean, it's worth stressing that she didn't actually go and do the experiment, but she was absolutely present and was an assistant, and was aware of what was going on. In terms of what she did, I think she has always moved in those circles. And her second husband or first husband, I can't remember which, it was a big collector, which is why she's sitting in this apartment in La Jolla full of priceless works of art. I mean, I don't know that much about art, but my DOP kept on going, that's probably worth about 30 million, that's about 20. And, she had, I think, the earliest example of Peruvian colonial art, the Virgin of Cusco, the original, just sort of hanging in this apartment, which is kind of extraordinary. But that sequence with her, with all those liberal icons, it's really important to me because these people who are involved in this, these aren't Nazi people. These are people who were very involved in civil rights, were very involved in women's rights, gave a lot of money to good causes. Peter Newbau's the founding father of child psychiatry in America, did a vast amount of good for children in this country. And I find that much more fascinating when there's grey areas of human behaviour where essentially decent people do bad things. I'm fascinated by that. And Lawrence Wright, the journalist, has this phrase, noble cause corruption, which he uses to explain, why good people sometimes do bad things in pursuit of a kind of goal, in this case, scientific knowledge, that they get blinded by. I mean, personally, I think ego was a huge part of it as well. They would have known that if they could definitively crack the kind of nature-nurture question and the relative weighting of those, they would become famous, and I think that was a huge part of it, as well as a desire for scientific knowledge. And look, the historical context is also important. In the 50s and 60s, there were all these quite out there scientific experiments, psychology experiments like Milgram's obedience experiment and later Stanford Prison experiment in the early 70s. So other people were doing this kind of thing, but I think my producer has less time for that argument because she spoke to various people who were at the agency at the time, social workers who refused to have any part of the experiment and felt it was totally unethical. And we've also seen documented proof that they approached other adoption agencies in New York for children for the study, and we're just told, no, we would never split. You just can't split identical siblings up. That's just wrong. So
there it is. So we're just about out of time, but I do want to say before we're done, just from a filmmaking level, the production values of this were equal to any narrative film you're ever going to see. And the way that you did those reenactment sections was so that those can tend to be kind of on the hokey side.
Yeah,
and they were just absolutely beautiful.
Thank you. I'm very ambivalent about reconstruction in general, but one of the things that I really wanted to do with this film is kind of force the audience perspective so that you experience information and events as the brothers experienced them. We are on the journey with them, and things are being revealed to us as they were to them. And obviously, before they met, there just aren't that many photos of them because no one knew that him going to college was going to be a big thing. So there isn't much archive. So we had to have something to fit there. But I really appreciate that. The thing that we put everything into in this film was the storytelling, was taking the audience through it, but also trying to, bring up these deeper philosophical ideas.
Well, it was done beautifully with a beautiful human connection to the whole thing, and yet such a lot of different things to think about and talk about. So I hope you'll all cast your ballots as you're on your way out, and if you want to talk to Tim, you'll probably be able to talk to him in the lobby a little bit.
Thank you so much. Thank you.